Um, Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon for one of the last sessions of this conference, and we have here with us this afternoon Paolo Gentiloni. He is the European Union Economic Commissioner, and is going to be interviewed not only by me, by two people. So lucky us. Abdel Latif, she is the Executive Director and Director of Research of the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies. And we have a lot of issues when we think about European economy, what is happening now, and the interactions that we have in the Mediterranean, especially with North Africa. But there is, so we're going to discuss energy inflation, what is happening to the growth model. But there is one topic that definitely stands out, in particular in the news. Right, Abla?
Yes, absolutely. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and Excellency, it's a pleasure and honor to be here for this discussion. Okay. Being Egyptian myself, and given the fact that COP27 has just ended a couple of weeks ago, energy is definitely one of the key issues that need to be talked about, energy and the green transition. Obviously, Europe has been facing very high energy prices. It has just recovered from the COVID, and there came the war, and you have very high energy prices, and European countries have taken strong measures to try and mitigate the effect of those high prices, like putting the caps on oil prices, among other things. One of the things that you have done also is use more of the fossil fuels. Okay? And actually, my question is generally about how you see the policies that were adopted, but with a lot of focus on this issue of using fossil fuels, because this seems to have lots of plus and minuses. Okay? The plus of finding a solution to the present problem, but at the same time, it's sort of crowding out the investments in the renewables, even within the European countries. At the same time, it seems to stand in a bit of contrast from the commitments and the dates for reaching the net zero. Okay, and also going back to the fossil fuel stands also in a bit of contrast to the what is imposed on Africa in general, not to use their own fossil fuels. So how do you see the impact on the MENA region, on the South Mediterranean, and on Africa on this issue?
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here in the ISPI 8 conference. Well, my view is that it's interesting, Dr. Abba, your question, because normally we are asked on this issue with a different point of view and even opposite point of view. And we are asked, I mean the European Commission, but why are you insisting in the green transition, in the green targets, in your ambition on the climate transition in such a hard time? Why are not you waiting? Why are not you triggering a pause button on the transition? Why are you keeping this ambitious target of reducing 55% of your emission in 2030? And our answer is that we have to go through this difficult moment where we are, of course, diversifying our supply of energy. We reduced enormously the dependence from the Russian gas. It was 40% of our gas import. It is now around 7%. And of course, we diversified this mostly through stronger relation with countries of the Mediterranean, by the way, from Algeria to Qatar to Egypt also. This diversification is going on, but I can assure you that if there are some member states that are using indeed more coal to address this emergency, this is completely temporary, that overall we are quite strong in our commitment to go on reducing emission. And I'm sure that the fact that the EU is in a leading role in the green transition will be very useful for other players in the world and will be useful also for our economy. I am not sharing the idea that this is only damaging the European economy. Of course, it's challenging. Of course, as when the cars were introduced or the computers were introduced, we are facing a historical change in all our economic models. But overall, we can also, I think, have the advantages of the first movers from this point of view. So crystal clear from my view that the EU is not downsizing or undermining its objective. The transition is there, and I'm very happy that, for example, exactly during the Sharm el-Sheikh conference, we were signing as EU an agreement on renewables with Egypt. So we have, of course, gas initiatives in Egypt, but we have also an agreement on renewables, because we know that for Africa in general, North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, renewables will be the future, and we have to work on this. So if there are counter tendencies, they are absolutely related to some member states and very, very temporary.
Okay. That's excellent.
The discussion on energy is particularly interesting because it's tightly linked with growth. And we know that there is no future without growth, right? But it's very hard to foster economic growth without affordable energy. And at the moment, the European Union has spent around 600 billion euros just to shield families, businesses from soaring energy prices. And we know this is a consequence of Russia's invasion of Ukraine and just in general, the changes in the economic global balances. So when we look at growth, there has also been a shift in approach. Historically, the European Union has been particularly open-minded, backing free trade, but this has changed a bit. Now there is an interest and growing push to defend strategic autonomy and also sometimes to protect your own garden. So how do you see this balancing act paying out in the next months and years, and also what is the model that can be sustainable, you think?
Well, indeed, as you said, we are spending money to support households and business to address these high energy prices. This is inevitable. What we would like as European Commission is that these measures are designed in a targeted way, because of course more vulnerable households and more energy intensive businesses are the one affected. We are no more in a sort of pandemic situation where you need to have a universal support for everyone, for each business, for the risk of massive unemployment, etc., etc. We have a very strange labor market with record lower unemployment rates coexisting with the fact that we tend to have in some countries some tendency of crisis of employment. So support shield, as you said, is inevitable. We would like to qualify it in a more targeted way, and we are asking this to member states. The balance you were rightly mentioning is typically in a Brussels claim that we have now. We are working for a open strategic autonomy. So
Which it's a tricky sentence, isn't it?
It could appear like an oxymoron, but it is the European Union, which is not an oxymoron. So open strategic autonomy means that, of course, in this crisis, we have to learn the lesson. And the lesson is that we need more secure supply chains. But the lesson is not that globalization is over. The lesson is not that we should privilege what is called the so-called friendshoring, so having trade relations only among like-minded. I think that the European Union should and will continue to be a model of economy based on competition inside the Union and on open trade, with two big differences, and this is the strategic autonomy. The open is that we will continue to be based on a competition model and to work for trading relation all over the world, and especially, of course, in the area of the Mediterranean, not only because we are here, but because it's in the interest of the Union. Strategic autonomy means two things. First, as I said before, we need to secure our supply chains. Because the dependency that we suffered from Russian fossil fuels is a dependency that could be repeated in other strategic sectors. So we have to address in a preventive way this kind of risk. The second part of strategic autonomy is that we have to develop in some sectors a industrial advanced leadership of the Union, which happened in some very limited sectors for example, in aviation, in the recent decades. But we have to admit the fact that for a long time, the competition-based model was, in a certain sense, refraining for having, I wouldn't say an industrial policy, but strategic businesses. For example, to mention something that I lived directly in another role, I remember very well the difficulty that we had when we were discussing the possibility to support a Franco-Italian company working on semiconductors. And the difficulty was that the idea entrenched in our competition-based model was, okay, but you will build a dominant company on the semiconductor sector with this Franco-Italian company. Now we are looking for companies making big investments.
There is also quite some competition on, like, among European Union countries to attract investments for that. So absolutely. It's going to be clearly a delicate balance for the EU, for Brussels, as you say, striking the support and the competition among member states.
We have to increase, I think, joint projects in some sectors, especially in the sectors of the future. We were mentioning semiconductors. We could mention the green hydrogen or other sectors where we need to work together and to have the awareness of the fact that the EU cannot be only a queen of regulation. You need also to be leading in some of the strategic sectors. And this is not at all in contradiction with keeping our openness on trade. we discussed a lot during the IMF meetings in October about this global discussion, what is the future of globalization. I completely disagree with those saying that globalization is over. I think that globalization will change in the coming years with the concern of security of supply chain, combining with keeping high level of trade and of globalization. In any case, this will be the European Union attitude.
About globalization and the fact that it is seen differently, just as you mentioned, and the nearshoring and the friendly shoring and the strategic autonomy, all those nice new terms, which have actually very delicate meanings. Okay, how does this translate into the dialogue between the EU and the south of the Mediterranean and North Africa, and actually even the rest of Africa in platforms like this one? You are the architect of the Med, and this year is the 8th anniversary of the Med that we are having the pleasure of attending. And the Med allowed for dialogues, for talks, for discussions. What do you see in the nature of those discussions, especially given that all the new issues there is a bright side and there's a dark side, okay? When you talk about the rest of the world, okay, including even what we were talking about again, if we talk about the energy, the climate, the growth, and if we talk about again the fossil fuels again, does this mean we're going to relax things? Europe is going to allow things to relax a little bit for Europe? I mean, the dialogue is going to be different, or the topics around it are going to be different. How do you see the dialogue following the war, given the conditions, which are actually tough? Even without the war, they were tough. The war simply made it worse, but they are tough. So how do you see this?
Yes, of course, the war, the Russian invasion changed the picture. And we know that it was the second black swan in a couple of years. So we were already coming from a deep crisis. The impact of the war, especially on energy prices and inflation, was huge. And of course, we measure this impact here in Europe from our point of view, which is what we were talking about, how to shield households and business from high energy prices. But we should be aware of the fact that at global level, the impact is even stronger and bigger, because the appreciation of the dollar is, of course, weakening low-income countries and even several emerging countries with high level of debt. Mm-hmm. And this is fragilizing the economies. I think the IMF have never seen such a pressure from different countries asking for programs, for support. So what should the EU in this framework work on? I think I would mention only two things. First, have clear the vision, the perspective. And the perspective is, if you look to geography and to demography, is that in this area, Europe, the Mediterranean, Africa, the Gulf, we are in the same challenge. And this will be in the coming 10, 20 years, an area of the world with billions of people living and with extraordinary potentiality of development. And for Europe, an aging society in several cases, the relation with the Mediterranean and with Africa is the future. Second point is that if you have this vision, you should address the emergencies, so food security, energy. We had on Monday a meeting, college to college, the EU and the African Union. We discussed on fertilizers, a task force on fertilizers. We discuss on vaccines. We are working together to build 4 facilities for mRNA vaccines in 4 African countries. Just thinking to the fact that 99% of medical equipment in Africa are imported.
Okay.
Only 1% is made in Africa. So we have to build capacity in the emergency, but more strategically, we have to invest and to do so also being perceived as the European Union, not as each and every member states doing this in its own.
That's extremely important to be
We
seen
labeled
as a full
we make a lot of labels in Brussels, but we call now this Team Europe, which is the European Union plus the different member states. And if you look to this Team Europe, almost in every African country, this is the main trade partner, Team Europe. But then we know that Team Europe is not always a very solid team. No, there are differences, etc. So we have to invest as a union, again, to looking also to strategic investments. Because Africa and Northern Africa are looking for their future, not only to the emergency.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I found very interesting in this meeting with the African Union the joint project to have submarine cables with connectivity, ensuring connectivity both from the western and from the eastern part of the Mediterranean towards Europe. These kind of projects are the one decisive to ensure development in Africa. And then, of course, renewables, small and medium enterprises, women empowerment. We know the receipts of the African future, but we have to work on this as a team, we, the Europeans, because we are not always perceived as a team.
Yes, this is true, and Africa does need all the support. Just a quick follow-up question before we move on to another topic. The entire global South, okay, is looking at the situation, whether we're talking climate problem, whether we're talking issues related to COVID, and so on, as being problems related to the weak voting voice of the global South. And so there are suggestions and calls for having a new Bretton Woods agreement, a new Marshall Plan, just like the one that existed, one that respects more the balance of power that exists in the world. How do you see this? What do you think of that suggestion? Because within the present framework, things are not going very far. Even the countries that are active in supporting the others, okay, they are not.
Yeah. I think this is what normally should happen when big crises happen. No? You were referring to Bretton Woods, and Bretton Woods was conceived by Keynes and others during the war, and to build a framework for after the war. And this is something that I think is quite necessary, not only to rebuild Ukraine when the war will be over, but for the global perspective. And this would take us to very different and long issues, starting from the future of the WTO, the role of the
IMF and the World Bank,
the euro single currency, the potentiality of new regional development banks. I think we have a set of dimensions, but the overall picture is we are No, not we are. Are we going towards a more multipolar world? In this multipolar world, of course, Africa and Europe will play a decisive role. So we need these two players to be in their different role, very strong, more united and stronger than they are until now.
We don't have much time, but we started this conversation with talking about the main big topic that is when we have in mind when we talk about energy right now, which is when we talk about economy now, which is energy. Now let's close with the second big theme, which is inflation. So those are the two key words, and I guess you spend most of your time in Brussels and in other conversations discussing how to tackle energy and inflation and them combined. If you try to think 1 year and 10 years down the road, do you think those two themes will still be the key of the discussions and the interest and the activity of European Union member states, and also when we think more globally about the interaction with Africa? Or do you think there are other threats, other themes that are slowly brewing and will become more crucial?
Well, I'm not under-evaluating inflation. Of course, inflation is there. Maybe we are peaking, and it will slowly go down, very slowly, I think, next year, and then a little bit faster in 2024. But if I should mention what is the main challenge ahead of us, I would say I think monetary policy will be able to manage inflation. Our fiscal policy should avoid to undermine monetary policy choices. So caution in public expenditure is crucial in this moment, especially in countries with high debt. But I think we can manage this situation. The real challenge is the historical transformation that our economies are facing for the green transition, for the digital revolution. And all this will change the mindset of policymakers, will need to change the skills of workers, and need a mountain of investments. Private investments, of course, mainly, but also fiscal space for public investment. So this is the real challenge, because everything from how we move, how we eat, how we consume, how we produce, will be transformed by this climate transition and this digital revolution. The sooner we are aware of this challenge, the better.
Well, we definitely are a bit more today after discussing that. Commissioner, thanks so much for surviving the double interview from me and Abdelatif.
We require hours of talking with you on this thing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are kindly invited to leave this room, and the closing ceremony will start in 15 minutes, so please leave the room. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you are kindly invited to leave the room now. Thank you very much.